Welcome, everyone, to the Vermont Interfaith Action Candidate Forum for Washington County Democratic Candidates for State Senate. My name is Ashley Kuchar. I'm a member of College Street Congregational Church, and I participate in a Vermont Interfaith Action racial justice local organizing ministry. This forum is an opportunity for candidates to address questions about their perspectives, priorities, and plans regarding issues that people of faith and congregations involved in Vermont Interfaith Action value. The state legislature sets policy, creates regulations and guidelines, and allocates funding on a host of issues. State senators from every district have considerable impact on the lives of all Vermonters. We hope this evening provides our candidates a satisfactory opportunity to share their views with their constituents, and that it provides voters with some insight into who each of these candidates is and how they might be as a state senator. Candidates, thank you for joining us for this and offering your thoughts tonight.
This is Jared, I think.
I would like to first invite Virginia Munkowitz to give our credential.
My name is Virginia Munkowitz, and I'm a member of Christ Church Presbyterian. Vermont Interfaith Action is a coalition of more than 70 congregations and individual persons of faith who work together to effect systemic change around social justice issues facing our communities and our state. All together, we represent about 16,000 people. VIA's mission is to create solutions to systemic issues that prevent our most vulnerable citizens from enjoying the quality of life God intends for us all. Today's questions come from VIA research on affordable housing and homelessness, racial justice, and corrections reform. They were written by VIA members and are the result of years of research. This forum will enable us as citizens to understand issues that are important to our community's well-being. As we listen to each candidate's response, we will become more informed citizens, and as we cast our votes, we will participate in and contribute to our democratic society. Our goal in VIA across all our issues is to improve the quality of life for all Vermonters, bringing the values of justice and compassion to the public square as our faith traditions guide us.
Thank you so much, Virginia. And I appreciate to optimize our listening experience for everyone, if folks could stay muted, except the candidates and those participating in moderating and helping with the forum. I would now like to invite Mary Beth Barrett to recognize who's here tonight by conducting our roll call.
Good evening. My name is Mary Beth Barrett, and I'm a member of Christ Church Presbyterian in Burlington, and also a member of the Racial Justice Organizing Committee. When I call your committee, your community of faith or your town tonight, please unmute yourself, make a little noise. So I'll start right with my own home community, which is Christ Church Presbyterian in Burlington. Let's hear it.
Yay.
Yay. Good Church Shepherd Episcopal in Barry.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. How about All Souls Interfaith Gathering? Yay. Good. College Street Congregational Church. Woohoo!
Yay.
How about the UU Church of Montpelier? I think I already saw Joan. There's at least a couple of you there. Old Meeting House in East Montpelier. Yay! And then any interested voters from other organizations or towns throughout Washington County.
Yay!
So, okay, thank you all for coming and welcome. I hope you enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Yes, Christ Church Episcopal in Barry. We meant to add that. So I would now like to invite Karen Chatfield to discuss the format and expectations of tonight's forum.
Good evening. My name is Karen Chatfield, and I'm a member of All Souls Interfaith Gathering in Shelburne. And I also participate in the VIA committees working on affording housing and homelessness and racial justice and economic opportunities. We have structured this forum to be as straightforward as possible. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to make an opening statement. Following that, they'll each be asked the same 8 questions by our presenters. We send up the questions ahead of time so that there are no surprises and to give them their best opportunity to provide a thorough, thoughtful, and concise response. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer each question. Mary Beth is our timekeeper, and she will help remind each speaker when they are approaching time, and again when they have reached it. And Mary Beth's going to show us the signs. Thank you. If the answer goes on beyond 90 seconds, Mary Beth will announce time aloud. We promise to keep to our allotted time for this forum, which means that there probably will not be time for any questions from the floor. But sometimes we do find that we have a few minutes for an additional question or two. If that happens, attendees can put questions in the chat, and they will go only to the administrators of this Zoom call. The general chat has been disabled so that everyone can stay focused on the presenters. If you have questions and we do not have time to ask them tonight, we encourage you to write them down, as we will provide ways to contact the candidates following the call. We ask that, if possible, all of our candidates be unmuted for the duration so as to avoid any unexpected technical delays. We also ask that, aside from the person asking each question, everyone else stays muted throughout. After all the prepared questions have been answered, each candidate will then have 1 minute to make any closing remarks. Again, Mary Beth will help as timekeeper.
Thank you, Karen. It's now time to hear from our candidates. So we would like to invite them each to make brief opening remarks. Again, we ask that these remarks be kept to 90 seconds. We will introduce our candidates in alphabetical order. Ann Cummings, please offer your opening remarks.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for having us here. My name is Ann Cummings. I'm one of the incumbents looking to be returned to the Vermont Senate. I'm the old timer. I have been there for over 20 years. I chair finance, have for over a decade, and we deal in anything that touches revenue, raising it, and broadband. So most of the housing bills have been through our committee, a lot of the economic development bills. I also have served, I think, for 8 years. I know I served with former Senator Ingram on health and welfare. I'm still there. And so we do all of the bills that touch on any of the social service programs. Frequently, those hit both of my committees. So I've also served on judiciary, economic development, and I chaired education for 2 years. So I would like to return. We're going to have a big 30% turnover this year in the Senate. And I think it's important that we have some continuity to get the best balance and to make the most progress as we tackle some very heavy problems that we're going to be looking at.
Thank you, Ann. Now we will hear opening remarks from Jared Duval.
Thank you, Debbie and Ashley, Mary Beth and Karen. And thank you to Vermont Interfaith Action and everyone joining the forum this evening. I want to say up front that I have long appreciated and admired VIA's work, which some of you know my wife, Reverend Joan Javier Duval, has been deeply involved in. That said, I also want to state up front that Joan has not been involved in any way in the planning of tonight's forum. I know that we're going to get into policy specifics throughout the course of the forum, so I want to start on a personal note. And that is that I come from and will always be committed to the working class of Vermont. For most of my childhood, my mom worked as a waitress and my dad as a chef. And after they divorced, they each moved from apartment to apartment. And when I was 10 years old, my father had a massive heart attack that nearly killed him. Unable to work after his quadruple bypass surgery, he lost his apartment, experienced housing insecurity, had his van repossessed, and eventually had to file for bankruptcy due to medical debt. Now, my dad was the hardest working, strongest person I've ever known. But the truth is that anyone can get knocked off their feet. And like VIA, I believe that a core responsibility of government is to be there with a strong social safety net in people's moments of greatest need. And that's one of the main reasons I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. And now we will hear opening remarks from Jeremy Hansen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for putting this event together. I'm Jeremy Hansen. I live in Berlin. My day job is a computer science professor at Norwich University. I also served on the Berlin Select Board for 7 years. I'm the founder and former chair of CV Fiber, which is a public entity that is trying to get broadband, real 21st century broadband, to everyone in central Vermont, starting with the places that need the access the most. It's a clear need that's out there. I also served on the Vermont Legislative Apportionment Board. I have 2 kids at home. I'm a renter. I'm feeling a lot of the stresses that folks are seeing in housing right now. So some of these questions that are posed here are really touching close to home for me, literally. I'm running in part because of the vacancy in the Senate here in Washington County. Anthony Polina, as you know, is retiring. And I've had the opportunity to be endorsed by Anthony for this run, and I hope that I can be as much of an advocate for working Vermonters as he was. I believe of the candidates here that I'm the most progressive voice and most likely to fill Anthony's shoes. My 3 main campaign issues are housing, climate change, and universal health care. These are all evidence of continuing inequality in Vermont and in the United States. These are kind of different facets of all the same inequality, something that I've been serious about and trying to work against for a very long time.
Thank you, Jeremy. And now we'll hear opening remarks from Andrew Perchlik.
Great, thank you. And thank you to VIA for having this forum. This is really important for our democracy, that people have different opportunities to hear the candidates speak and to meet the candidates. And thank you to the candidates for being candidates. There's a lot of other Senate elections this year where there are only the number of candidates that are seats. And I think it's good for Washington District and our voters that they have choices. I thank everybody for being involved. I'm asking the voters of Washington County to re-elect me to the state Senate. This would be my 3rd term. I feel like after 2 terms, partly because half of that was during COVID, so we were Zoom legislating, that I feel like I'm just kind of hitting my stride in how effective I can be for the voters of the district. I've built good relationships with the 20 or so returning senators, and I know a lot of the candidates throughout the state. So I think I will really be able to hit the ground running, hopefully in a new leadership roles in the Senate to serve you all. My 3 priorities are children and families, so paid family leave, childcare. I think we should make sure that no child is left inside. We need to make sure children have access to outdoors, and clean energy economy, and also our democracy. That we need to support our democracy as strong as we can. That's civics education, and that's ranked choice voting. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And finally, we'll hear opening remarks from Ann Watson.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Ann Watson, and I hope to earn one of your 3 votes for state Senate for the Washington Senate District. I am running mainly because of climate action. I work every day with high school students. I'm a high school teacher at Montpelier High School, where I've been for the past 17 years. And I know they are very worried about climate change, and so am I. So I've been passionate about working on climate action through the city of Montpelier in my role as mayor and as a city councilor. So I've been the mayor of Montpelier for the past 4 years. And, even as I've worked on issues of climate action, I also hear frequently from folks that Vermont's economic policies are just not working for them. This includes the lack of high quality, affordable childcare, the lack of paid family and medical leave, and the lack of affordable housing. And on on these issues, as mayor, we've actually been able to make some progress on those topics. But if we're going to really make substantial change, we need the support from the state to make progress on a larger scale. So I'm really excited to be running for state senate. So I have experience crafting policy. I'm a coach, I'm a teacher, I'm a union member, I'm a mom, and I look forward to having more discussion about these topics this evening.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to all the candidates. It is time to get into the questions prepared by our local organizing committees. As a reminder, you'll each be asked the same question by one of our presenters and given 90 seconds to answer. Our timekeeper will remind you when your time is up. In the interest of full disclosure, we'll state what Jared Duval has already mentioned, that his wife, Reverend Joan Javier Duval, is on the VIA board. But again, she had no input whatsoever into the drafting of these questions or preparation of this forum. So I'll turn it over to Erica for our first question.
Thank you so much for being here. So my name is Erica Rail, and my day job is I work with folks that are homeless at a drop-in center, and I'm on the homeless outreach board. And so one of our organizing committees focused on affordable housing and homelessness. So let's start with addressing homelessness, get right to the meat of it. Currently, there are over 2,000 Vermonters who are being sheltered by the state in motels using federal dollars. What are your ideas on how to house these adults and children when the money runs out in the spring? And I guess we're going to start with Ann Cummings. Thank you.
Yeah, you're going to find out that the women at this point that chair money committees are about as welcome sometimes as mosquitoes at a picnic, because there are a lot of good ideas, but my committee has to find the money to fund them. We have a lot of federal money. We initially started putting folks into hotel rooms. We had done it weather related, but putting them in full time, because in the shelters where everybody was kind of in close quarters would have been a super spreader during COVID. So we got everybody individual rooms. We're going to be very hard pressed to come up with the money to do that. And the hotels, as the economy and people are traveling, are going to be hard pressed to let us. So we're going to have to find another alternative. I know locally, Good Samaritan Haven just started. We're going to have to expand our shelter system. We're going to have some folks drop through the hoops as we start. The only way we can come up with the federal money is to raise more money in the state or cut other services. And I've yet to find a service. I'm more concerned about the safety net services that are not adequately funded, that frequently people who are homeless depend on. So we've got a big mess, and we're working our way through it, and we're getting as much money in there as we can. But at this point, I do not have a source to just keep on going. We should have a lot of housing coming online. We've been building it for a year now. I'm working with a young woman and 2 kids that are homeless in Chittenden County. I should talk to you. Trying to find them a home. It's a big problem.
Thank you, Ann. Jared?
So first, Erica, thank you for the question and for your work. I think that while the motel housing program was needed, I think that we also need to acknowledge it was an unstable short-term fix that left many feeling insecure. And I think that permanent housing is what we need to work for. I strongly believe in and support a housing first approach. I think that housing is one of the most basic human needs and is necessary to ensuring a baseline of human dignity, which I view as a moral imperative, like many VIA members. Not only is a housing first approach more humane, I think that research shows that it is also more cost effective over time. So I believe that we can and should work to achieve the goal of ending homelessness in Vermont, or that to the extent that homelessness does occur, that it is rare, short-lived, and non-recurring. So I think that many candidates will likely agree with this in principle, but I want you to know that I will be there with you when the going gets tough. I won't throw up my hands or say that raising revenue is too difficult. Specifically, when federal dollars run out, I will ask the highest income Vermonters and the wealthiest among us to pay their fair share to ensure that we can meet this most basic responsibility that we have to our people. I will also prioritize fully funding the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which can leverage state and federal dollars fivefold to make more significant progress. And I will also work to help pass a rental housing registry to better help ensure safe housing for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Jeremy?
Sure. So yeah, I'll certainly echo some of the things that Jared said. And I think the pandemic has really underscored the fact that both poverty and homelessness, these are policy choices. These are political choices that legislators at the state and federal levels make. When we had the pandemic, folks were getting checks, folks had housing, and we were able to come up with the funds to make this happen. It was coming out of federal money, and I understand we're not going to see that anymore, but the solution is to continue to house folks in hotels as necessary, but continue to invest in suitable transitional and then more permanent housing. So like the housing that's here in Berlin, the Welcome Center, that's something I've been watching for a while, since the motel went on the market for the first time. The first guest moved in yesterday, in fact. It was a pretty awesome interview with him on the news that I saw. But that could not have been built without state funding and without federal funding. And it couldn't have been built without a lot of hard work from Rick and the other folks over at the Good Sam. So we have to make sure that when people need housing that they get it. And we do talk about affordable housing, not transitional housing necessarily. But we'll talk about that in a bit, so I'll hold off on there. But to fund this, we have to ask wealthy Vermonters to pay their fair share of taxes again. This is a choice, and we can choose to tax the folks who can afford it so that we have the social safety net for the folks that don't have the money, that can't afford it.
Thank you, Jeremy. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks for the question and all your work on this issue. And just for the record, I didn't get the questions ahead of time, so maybe the other ones did. So you'll see me more having to think of this on the spot. So I didn't research it and think of what the best funding source would be. So I don't have a funding source. I do support taxing those Vermonters that can afford more taxes, but maybe not for this. There's a lot of other needs, and there's only so much we can tax them, but it is something that I would support. I thought the hotel program was a good program. It had its problems, but it was pretty remarkable that we were able to house so many homelessness. In a way, we kind of solved homelessness if we had the money. We kind of showed that it can be done if we want to get it done. And I think that was a valuable lesson. As I said, I don't have an answer for how we're going to fund it or where we're going to house those folks when the program ends, but it is critical. I agree with the other comments of the other candidates that it should be a top priority and that housing should be first. And it shows how we treat the homelessness, those that find themselves without homes, is just a good signal of what kind of community we want to have and what kind of society we want to have. And I think it does need to be a statewide solution. We can't rely on municipal budgets and for towns to deal with it one at a time, each one doing it differently with different levels. So I do think it's a statewide responsibility, and that's the only way we're going to make real progress. I agree with the fully funding the VHCB. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'm so sorry you didn't get the questions ahead of time.
Yeah, I did. I just didn't notice them or something.
And Anne.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with a lot of what's been said in terms of especially fully funding the Housing and Conservation Board. But I also want to point out that Burlington has been doing some really interesting work with pallet shelters. The city of Montpelier also has recently had a meeting with the pallet shelter folks, and it's something that the city of Montpelier is looking into as well. And if I think it's actually really unfortunate that municipalities are having to step in to address this because the state funding has just not been sufficient. And so if the state funding can help finance the new beds, like through what might be offered through the pallet shelter opportunity, then they absolutely should do that, because while we are building more housing, and I know the last legislative session put a lot of money towards new housing, and I think that's important, I am also very afraid that it's not going to be ready in time for folks when the money does run out, for folks to stay in hotels. And then, so in addition to that, I would also, so I would say we need a dedicated funding source for these service providers, like Good Samaritan, like A New Place. But then beyond that, I think we also need to be looking at addressing the causes of homelessness, including things like increasing the minimum wage to a livable wage level. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can be done. That's just one.
Thank you so much, Anne. So my next question is, what are your ideas on how to ensure those who receive housing assistance have access to the supports they need, no matter what that looks like to them, whether it's parenting classes, budgeting, counseling, and other help? How will they get it? And I'm going to mix it up a little bit and go ask Jared first. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. So I want to start by saying that I'm really excited about the nearing opening of the Welcome Center at the former Twin City Motel. And I want to extend my thanks and congratulations to the Good Samaritan Haven and everybody involved in bringing that vision to reality. I think that it's crucial that the Welcome Center is not just about more beds. It will offer a more holistic set of supports, including having a case manager, a food coordinator, and other staff on site. I recently read the strategic plan for the Good Samaritan Haven, and I think that one of the values listed in that plan is really relevant to this question. And that is, we believe in meeting people where they are and addressing their needs as they define them. I've also appreciated some of the commentaries on this subject by Morgan Brown, who's written persuasively about the open dialogue approach, which he describes as a holistic process that includes the person in various levels of need serving as a key player of a team that works with them. I think that this principle extends beyond individuals to organizations as well. We have many local organizations such as Capstone, the People's Health and Wellness Clinic, Another Way, Turning Point, and many more that are doing incredible work. And I believe that policymakers need to listen to them when they say what they need best to serve our neighbors. And that includes ensuring that social services are well supported with financial resources. So that is something that I will work for as one of your state senators, if you will help me with one of your up to 3 votes.
Thank you, Jared. Jeremy.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think this kind of piggybacks on my previous answer. So we have to make this policy decision that these services are valuable and that there's something that Vermont should be providing. So the question talks about parenting classes, budgeting, counseling, and so on. But in addition to funding it and making sure that those things are available, we also need to make sure that folks know what's available in the first place. Just as an example, while I was chairing CV Fiber, we discovered that it was something like, I don't know, there was some large percentage of folks who were eligible for federal broadband subsidies and that were not receiving those subsidies. Folks who could not afford internet access for their kids to go to school remotely or to work remotely, and they weren't taking advantage of it. And then, so as a big effort with a lot of our board members, we helped to advertise that. And then we started communicating with Green Mountain United Way to make sure that folks that were using 211, that were receiving that information, so that if they were in a situation where they were looking at their budget and they just didn't know how to make that work or how they could get internet access, that was something that they had at their fingertips. And so a big shout out to folks at Green Mountain United Way for maintaining that resource, 211. And that's, I think, a cornerstone for providing these services, this sort of services that people need. And a lot of what I'm about to say happens already, including at the Welcome Center, and Jared mentioned this previously, but we should also be looking to make sure that the various providers of all of these different services are also knowledgeable about each other, so that someone who's helping with like transitional housing, for example, like at the Welcome Center, they can direct folks to Capstone's like Mileage Smart program if they need a fuel efficient car of their own, or whatever other situation they find themselves in.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a great question. I think it's kind of to Mayor Watson's point about we need to figure out why people are becoming homeless. And I think a lot of it are what kind of services we provide from early childhood on up, so that we have just a healthy society, so people don't find themselves in these circumstances. And that goes to, improving our mental health services. It makes sense that we have more like community schools, so children in school have the care that they need, and it's not just about what they're learning as far as the 3 R's, but that we're treating their emotional learning, and that they can be the best of themselves as they grow into adulthood. And so I think it's important that we have all these services for these folks. I'm sure you guys all heard that a tale of the people that were saving people that were in the river, and they kept pulling people out of the river. And then somebody said, well, shouldn't we go upstream and figure out who's pushing these people into the water? Like, that's really what we need to do. So that's how I took the question, is how are we going to provide these services so that people don't find themselves in these economic straits to where they're homeless? As Jared said, like, it can happen to anybody. And I think it's medical debt, like in Jared's family example. And so that's a reason why things like universal health care can be a solution for homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Anne?
Yeah, coming back to this question of how are people going to get connected to the services that they need. One of the things that I think could be really powerful for folks is just having someone dedicated to outreach. So having some kind of an outreach worker or a liaison that can connect directly with folks who are in need of services with the services that exist, so that there is someone who can direct folks like exactly to where they need to go. So the city of Montpelier actually has had some success with this. We formed a homelessness task force some time ago, and one of the things that came out of that was a street outreach worker to work directly with folks who are experiencing homelessness, and to get them connected with service providers with whatever kind of service they might need. And so that person was funded through the city, but it was really through Good Samaritan. And that has been very successful. And so I think we should not underestimate having someone whose job it is to make those connections for folks. And so I would support that as a state senator.
Thank you so much, Anne. And lastly, Anne.
Okay, the mosquito. I think in my experience, the advocacy groups do a pretty good job. I like the dialogue model in getting people out there. I think we need to understand that there are some people who are homeless simply because their rent just went up 100% and they can't afford it, and they're living in their cars. But there's also a whole core of folks who are homeless because they're dealing with substance misuse, they're dealing with mental health issues, and just putting them in a home without the services is not going to solve the problem. I've been really focused on making sure that those mental health services are there. We have chronically underfunded our community mental health system, in my opinion. Most of them are looking at about a 30% vacancy rate. They cannot compete with the state or the schools or the hospitals in pay. I have twice voted to put a surcharge on to protect safety nets. People have talked about taxing the rich, and I've said I will do that. But there's only so much money there, and that money has been homelessness, universal health care, the Green New Deal, free or reduced college. There isn't enough money there to pay for everything we would like to do. So we're going to have to make some very hard decisions.
Thank you so much, Ann.
Thank you all. I am Beth Ann Mayer. I am affiliated with Christ Episcopal Church in Montpelier and the Church of the Good Shepherd in Barrie. So let's turn to affordable housing itself. We know that a large amount of funds was committed to building new units of affordable housing during this last legislative session. And we thank all of you who worked on that and supported that. But going forward, what measures will you champion to ensure that the people who need this housing have access to it? Taking into consideration the fact that much affordable housing requires having good credit, no eviction record, no police record, and all of these restrictions on entering housing explain why many people become homeless in the first place. So can we hear your ideas on access to affordable housing? And we'll start this round with Jeremy.
Sure, thanks. So I guess when it comes down to it, if there's affordable housing available and someone needs it, there should be a path for them to be able to access it. Full stop. That's it. There are too many barriers to folks getting housing when they need it. So a handful of ideas come to mind. I think normalizing private rental properties taking Section 8 vouchers, notwithstanding all of the issues with Section 8 vouchers like you had in your question there. But like in Massachusetts, suburban Boston, it's much more common to see rental properties listed as accepting Section 8 housing vouchers. And I'm not sure why we don't see more of that in Vermont. It'd be great to see that. So second, we should be looking at supporting organizations that help people use their Section 8 vouchers for homeownership. So even if it's not available for Section 8 rentals, there are programs that allow the use of Section 8 vouchers for homeownership, which is a pretty exciting opportunity, I think. And then for the folks who have a drug-related eviction record, thanks Ronald Reagan, we should offer some stopgap program to help folks qualify again and sort of fill that 3 years in there of ineligibility, help them qualify again for Section 8. But really, I mean, I guess this boils down to we should aim to reduce these knock-on consequences of people's involvement in the criminal justice system, and especially those that were part of the failed and structurally racist war on drugs, exactly like this one.
Thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. We did a program last legislative session, and I think maybe there was a pilot the year before where we provide money for those that own buildings that aren't being rented out, that there needs so much work, and the amount of rent that they would have to collect to do the renovations makes them just unaffordable. So the building owners of these homeowners just let them sit there. They're delinquent properties. And so we had a program that would help pay for the refurbishment of those apartments or those units, those buildings, with the condition that they make them available to either somebody coming out of homelessness or just make them affordable rent for a time being. And I think we saw a lot of success in that. That also helped us to do infill and downtown development, which is another goal. So I think programs like that, where when we provide assistance, that we make sure that assistance is tied to affordability. And we do that with affordable housing, that they're forever going to be affordable. But I think we can be creative. I've talked to housing developers that want to build more housing. They want to be part of the solution, but they say, as soon as I start building a new building, that's the day that I've made it unaffordable. And they realize that. So we need to partner with those developers, whether they be nonprofit organizations or private developers, and say, we can provide tax credits for other ways of making this affordable housing.
Thank you. Ann Watson.
Yeah, thank you. I want to focus on the part of your question about those barriers that people face to accessing the affordable housing that does exist. One of the things that came up in the legislative session last time was Burlington Charter Amendment for just cause evictions. And that was passed, but then was vetoed and was not overridden. And so that is something that I think is, I was very disappointed to see that get vetoed. I think that has a lot of potential. I would actually really like to explore the idea of just cause evictions statewide, because people really should not be getting evicted for racist reasons, unless they're, well, for racist reasons, period. But there should be a just cause for an eviction to happen. Secondly, thinking about the criminal records that folks might be carrying with them, I think it highlights the importance of expungement and these kinds of expungement clinics that are offered around the state from time to time. And I would love to see expungement clinics happen regularly in an equitable way around the state, but even I think some kinds of misdemeanors ought to be expunged automatically after a certain period of time, so that folks can move on with their lives and not necessarily have to take up more service time to get things expunged. And then finally, thinking about the services that many of our community development housing organizations provide around credit counseling courses should be accessible. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Ann Cummings.
Okay. First thing, I think I started out as an anti-poverty worker in the 1960s, and we made mistakes. And some of the mistakes we made were in building huge housing projects, and we created vertical ghettos. We're trying now not to do that, to just take the poor, the homeless, and slam them all in together. And so an awful lot of our affordable housing units, one way to keep them affordable is that they're mixed income. And so you have some market rate units, the condos, the apartments that have been built by Downstreet and Montpelier work that way. It's been shown that it kind of raises everybody's boat if everybody is keeping their apartment clean, if everybody is civil, and it seems to be a better model. But in trying to do that, they set barriers. I think we need to have a system that says, okay, you get a second try. And there are going to be people that don't qualify, but if we let people in, I live across the street from the hotel and motel in Montpelier. The police car is there with more regularity than the school bus. There are issues, and I think we want to make housing succeed and help those that can be helped.
Thank you. Jared?
So thank you, Beth Ann, for the question and for your work in this area. With regard to the question about the challenges of accessing affordable housing when there's requirements around needing to have good credit, no eviction record, and no police record, I think we need to look at why those restrictions are in place and if and how there may be instances where they can be changed. So this is an area where I don't have a lot of expertise, but it's something I would want to learn from and with you on. Again, my starting principle is that I strongly believe in and support a housing first approach, and that's for everybody, not just those with good credit. And again, this is personal to me. When my dad had medical debt, lost his apartment, he wasn't able to find a place. And so he ended up living in a tent on the backside of a flea market for 5 or 6 months. Now, thankfully, he had family that he was able to move in with when it got really cold, but we shouldn't have those type of situations. We don't need to have those type of situations for anybody in Vermont. I also just want to say that I supported the just cause eviction effort to change the Burlington City Charter and was disappointed that the governor vetoed that law and that the legislature failed to override his veto. I would have voted to override that veto. I should also say, when it comes to some of the restrictions on access to affordable housing, I do think that on balance, we need to make sure that people who live in multifamily situations, they deserve to be safe in their homes. And if somebody has an eviction or a police record related to violence done to others, that's a different set of circumstances and should be looked at differently with certain precautions in place. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to move on to another aspect of this question, that there's also a scarcity of housing in the private marketplace that is affordable for first-time home buyers and for renters, even if they earn a decent salary. And that really affects our workforce availability. So what measures do you suggest to create more housing that those in the middle income range can afford? And we'll start this round with Andrew.
Yeah, no, it's an important question because housing is definitely one of the main issues that I hear when I go out and talk to folks in the district. There's, a story every minute about the difficulty folks have had or the costs and how the few times that they find a house, they get outbid and they can't afford to get any of the houses that they're out there. I think it's a similar answer to your last question, that the state needs to work with private developers on making these units affordable. If we supply tax credits, or if there's some changes in permitting or anything that's going to help them to lower the cost to build these homes, that we make sure that they're affordable for a certain amount of time, and that we're supporting, separately from that, the money and support for those doing the first home buyers. So I think, like the mortgages that they're no money down and they don't have to pay the money back unless they sell the house or move out. I think programs like that are critical for first home buyers, because it's like the renters. You also need a good credit score to buy a home and get a mortgage. So we need to find ways to have those people that don't have that credit or that history to be able to buy a home. But it's a critical problem that there just isn't enough out there, and we want to make sure we're not building homes that are against our environmental ethic in the state. So we still want to have the permitting that we have. Thank you.
Ann Watson.
Yeah, thank you. I have a few ideas about this, but I would start by prefacing it. I'd preface it by saying that I would prioritize building more in locations that are already impacted by development, so that we don't end up with a lot of sprawl, ideally. So in order to make it easier for the permitting process to happen, I would recommend and advocate for exempting downtowns from the Act 250 process if they have strong environmental regulations to go with their zoning in downtowns. That would help facilitate the process, make it easier and less duplicative, because it often is. And then secondly, I would also like to explore something called land value taxation, or land-based taxes for downtowns. So this is a different way of thinking about taxes. Instead of valuing or taxing a piece of property based on the value of the building, it's based on the square footage of the land. And so it actually encourages folks to build upwards and use the space, use the land in a different way, and has a lot of potential for increasing densities in downtowns, which I think is a good thing. And then lastly, I would also, on that note, just thinking about the kinds of housing that are available to folks in terms of building in municipalities. I just want to recognize that single family housing only zoning is based in racism. And I think we as a state need to look at places that have restrictions that only allow single family housing units. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Ann Cummings.
Okay, as a former mayor, member of the Planning Commission who took Montpelier's original master plan through the Planning Commission and it went to the city council the day I became mayor. I'm also a retired realtor, so this is near and dear to my heart. Essentially, Vermont has not built enough housing for decades, and for a variety of reasons. And so our housing stock is old. Old housing is expensive to have airtight. It just keeps needing continual money put into it. I think we can be more creative. I support smart growth. We should be building, in those developed areas. But I think we also have to, be cognizant of the needs of families. You crowd people together and kids cry and make noise and there are issues. I think we could work the cost of raw materials, one of the biggest drivers. And then the others is we have asked developers to do a lot of niceties like underground utilities, granite curbing, cement sidewalks. I live on, I think, a very expensive neighborhood given my tax bill. And we don't have sidewalks in Montpelier because it's a little kind of self-enclosed area. Kids play in the street. Other than building more, and I think perhaps the state could work with bulk buying. We need to upgrade that, help in getting that down payment. It's getting that first down payment, and you really need to have 20% down.
And
you
I'm
save
calling
a lot of money.
time.
Okay.
I just want to let you know it's time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jared.
So I agree that there is a real undersupply of housing, and the statistics on this are really powerful. So there was a recent 7 Days series, and it pointed to the fact that in the 1980s, Vermont was building approximately 3,000 new housing units a year, but that recently that number has been closer to 400 a year. And so while I think the recent investment, the increased investment in housing should help increase those numbers in the near term, I think we also need to work for long-term structural fixes. And that includes making it easier to build housing in Vermont's downtowns and village centers in alignment with our commitments around smart growth principles and our historic settlement pattern of higher density downtown and village centers surrounded by farm, forest, and natural areas. I think that a key priority in this area has to be continued and expanded investment in infrastructure such as water and wastewater systems, and looking at updating zoning to allow for multifamily housing and accessory dwelling units. But it's not just on the supply side. I also think that part of the problem here is on the demand side, and that in many instances, Vermonters who are trying to buy or rent a residence are competing with corporations who see housing as an investment opportunity, driving up housing prices. I think we need to look at doing more to differentiate the rates between residential and investment property taxes, or homestead versus non-homestead taxes. And in particular, I would be in favor of looking at increasing the rates for non-homestead properties to discourage speculation and help moderate prices and bring down costs for residential owners and folks.
Thank you all. Jeremy, I'm sorry.
Thanks. So as a renter whose landlords just sold, they actually closed today. My landlord, I have a new landlord as of this afternoon. This is at the forefront of my mind. I really like the shared equity model of community land trusts like Downstreet, and I would really like to see more of the housing money that Vermont hands out go to nonprofit organizations like them, rather than funneling millions of dollars to private developers. So in particular, zero down payment and down payment assistance programs like those that we already have from USDA and FHA and VHFA, we should continue funding them and supplement them. I personally, I'm trying to buy a house right now, and I would not have been able to afford the house that I'm trying to buy without these programs. I am a beneficiary and a very grateful beneficiary of those programs. Never mind the extra bureaucracy that some of those programs have, which is not trivial, but they are valuable. Other options that might help could be incentivizing the construction of accessory dwelling units, ADUs, like has been mentioned before, near existing residences where such structures are appropriate. Again, places where we can do infill, we should be looking there first. We're not talking about climate too much tonight, but that is something that we need to keep in mind as we're saying that we need to build more houses. I think Vermont should also take steps to disincentivize, as Jared said, disincentivize short-term rentals by increasing those non-resident property taxes for those out-of-state investors who convert things that would be suitable housing for Vermonters who want to stay here much more long-term into short-term rentals. Then we can take that revenue and plow it back into Downstreet and other down payment assistance programs.
Thank you.
So I'm Linda Wentworth at Church of the Good Shepherd in Barre, and I'm on the Corrections Reform Local Organizing Ministry. Another important issue focus for VIA is reform of our corrections system. We have found that there are varying perspectives on the concept of incarceration. What do you believe to be the purpose of incarceration? What needs to be done regarding the culture, the physical facilities, and the programming to achieve this purpose? Ann Watson?
Yeah, thank you. So I see the primary function of incarceration as rehabilitation, and that includes reskilling and reconciliation, which is why restorative justice is so important. It helps keep people out of the system in the first place, and it reduces recidivism. So I know that reskilling and reconciliation and rehabilitation is more expensive than just ignoring people in prisons. And there's already some great programs for folks, but it's not enough. So one of the things that I would love to see is a partnership between correctional facilities and local farms, because I believe that our food is our first medicine, and so we need to have good food going to the folks that are at correctional facilities. And I think it would also benefit farmers to have large contracts so that folks who are incarcerated can be eating a high quality food. So that's one thing. I would also, in terms of thinking about the rehabilitation, it's really also about folks' reentry into the working world. And so I am very interested in making sure that that transition for folks is smoother than it is right now, especially in terms of thinking about driver's licenses that expire or IDs that expire while people are incarcerated. And also there are some professions in Vermont that bar ex-offenders from holding certain professional licenses, even if the offense that they had nothing to do with the profession. So I think there's work to be done there as well. Thanks.
Thank you. And Cummings?
Thank you. Vermont has a restorative model. Our goal is to rehabilitate and to only have violent felons behind bars and in jail. There's a second goal of corrections, and that is public protection. There are some people that are very dangerous, and at this point, either in medication or psychology, they're still very dangerous. We have been doing corrections reinvestment. Every time we don't send somebody to jail, the money we save is being put into community services. Most of those are mental health, drug and alcohol counseling. Housing is a major issue when it comes to people getting out of prison because they have to have a house or a home, and we don't have that. It's part of the last problem. We've set up expungement. I think we're doing a lot. But we can always do more. Again, resources is key. We need those mental health systems. We need those transition homes all to be adequately funded.
Thank you. Jared?
Thank you, Linda, again for the question and for your work on this in this area. I think that part of the challenge is that there are really multiple stated purposes of incarceration, and they don't always align with each other. So one stated purpose that you see is accountability for breaking the social contract. Another is public protection, especially to prevent those who've committed violent crime from harming others again, as Senator Cummings said. And a third is deterrence of future crime. I believe that the fourth often does not get enough attention, and that is crucially important, and that's rehabilitation. As a society, I think that we need to, and we should want to ensure that when someone is released from prison, that they are less likely to reoffend, and that's both for their sake and for ours. So I think a key challenge here is that the culture, the physical facilities, the programming that you mentioned that are related to those first three purposes of incarceration are often not in line with the interests of that fourth one, the interests of rehabilitation, and in fact can often work against it. So again, as with other issues, this is something where I would want to listen to and learn from and with those who have the life experience and expertise to be able to suggest effective reforms. From those who were in and are currently in the prison system to those who work in the prison system, public advocates and researchers. I think that that's really important. So thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Thanks. Yeah, so a Criminal Justice 101 class says that there's 4 principles for punishment: deterrence, rehabilitation, incapacitation, and retribution. And it's not going to be any surprise that I'm going to agree with what folks have already said. So incapacitation and rehabilitation are the main goals of incarceration, depending on the severity of the situation. There are folks that need to be separated from society for a time. And there are folks that need to be given the tools that they need to come back into society. There's not really evidence that deterrence works well, and none of us really should be comfortable with the state carrying out retribution in our name. That's not really a thing, I think, in modern society that we should support. I think we have some great alternatives to incarceration that we could fund. Diversion works well. And looking at restorative justice, I think that works. Knowing when it works and when it doesn't, that we can help it target appropriate circumstances where that's useful. Because it requires the consent of victims, it's not always the right choice. It's not something that we can just apply across the board. We should also strongly consider revamping sentencing policy. So at the moment, we have criminal backgrounds being used as part of decisions about sentencing. So criminal histories are a record of the courts, and they're not really a truth of whether someone was culpable or the situation, what sort of plea deal they did. And so if we accept, like I do, that we have a racist system, then if we're using the records of a racist system, we're just going to get racist results out the other side. I think I'll just end it there.
Oh, great. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with much that is said, that prime goals are rehabilitation and protection. I think in particular protection of the victims. I think sometimes in corrections reform, we forget that there are sometimes some victims, and we need to make sure we're working with the victims so that they can also recover. And I think that's why restorative justice is so important, because it does take the victims into consideration and works with both the offender and the victim to get to a solution that I think helps in rehabilitation. I think we have a real problem with the fact that we don't have a juvenile facility. When Woodside was closed, the state and the Scott administration promised us that there was going to be a solution. We don't have a solution. So we're incarcerating juveniles in adult prisons, or at least trying to. Thankfully, the courts are prohibiting that, at least for now. So we definitely need to find solutions for those juveniles that need to be incarcerated, or do the justice reinvestment so that they don't need to be incarcerated, that there are other ways to deal with them when they get into these troubles. So that, I think another thing that's important in my mind is that when we have somebody that has broke the social contract, that finds themselves incarcerated, that's an example that we did something wrong, similar to what Jeremy was saying, like whether it be racism or other issues, we failed that person in our society. We didn't invest them when they were a child or something else. And so it's our responsibility to fix that wrong. So thank you.
Excuse
thank
me
you.
just a moment, Linda. I'm going to jump in to say, in an effort to get us back on track, we're going to make an adjustment for the last 3 questions and just limit answers to 60 seconds. So 1 minute instead of 90 seconds. So remaining questions will just be, you got that, Mary Beth? 60 seconds. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. There has been a great deal reported recently about the shortage of corrections officers in Vermont. How would you suggest we handle this shortage and their working conditions? How will you ensure adequate funding for your ideas? We'll start with Ann Cummings.
Okay, I think the first thing, we've made a couple strides. They now have their own union. They're able to be dealt with as a group. We have a real downward spiral at this point because we need them to do the job. We don't have enough. People are working overtime. They're getting tired, and it just spirals down. We do need to increase the wages. And, this is not a job that gets a lot of respect. We need to increase the professionalism, the training, the wages, and the working conditions. And we need, they're just kind of hidden out there and dealt with about as well as politicians are in the public media and just, perceptions. I think we need to do some PR work. And the funding, wages come out of the general fund. They're part of the Pay Act. And once it's negotiated between the union and the administration, we have to pay it. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Jared?
So Mary Beth, thank you for the question and for your work in this area. I think that we have to start by recognizing that these are very difficult jobs in difficult conditions. And that was has been especially true during the pandemic. I don't presume that there are easy answers here, but whenever I hear about workforce shortages, my mind immediately goes to a couple of questions, at least, including, are those individuals compensated fairly and what are their working conditions like? And I think there is more that can be done in those areas. I'm hopeful that recent attention to this issue and the plan that was presented by Vermont's correction officials a couple of weeks ago can be a step in the right direction. I think that working with correction staff and their union, there can be more sustainable solutions, including looking at areas that have been brought up, including scheduling and mental health support. But look, I think this is not an isolated issue, and there are no short-term fixes. Other professions are facing staffing challenges as well. And while this might seem like an odd place to talk about childcare and affordable housing, I think at an underlying long-term level, this issue also connects back to others that we discussed at the beginning of the forum. So as economic development director at the Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development, it was really clear to me how interlinked these economic challenges are. And I don't believe that we can have the workforce we need unless we do more to provide affordable housing opportunities and greater access to and support for childcare. And that goes for the workforce across many professions, including corrections officers.
Great, thank you, Jared. And now Jeremy?
Thanks. And Mary Beth, you were muted, by the way.
I just wanted to let you know this is the shorter time frame.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't stop.
So so I think we should start with facilities that are modern and safe and of sufficient capacity. One's workplace has a pretty large effect, I think, on workplace morale. And additionally, like other folks have said, we need to be paying competitively. We need to have a job that, makes sense for someone to choose to pay their bills at the end of the month. The union, I think, definitely helps in that regard. We should also consider ways of reducing the number of people who are being incarcerated in the first place. So avoiding the stresses of overcrowding on our correctional officers, and that also reduces costs. And then it doesn't exactly fit in here, but in terms of a place that does the thing that we're saying that these facilities are supposed to be doing, the rehabilitation. Some programs that are offered to inmates can have a ripple effect with the guards, a better work environment for the guards. So for example, there's a Danish kind of campus style design for a correctional facility, and that they showed that it could reduce recidivism significantly, about 27%. And this emphasized the rehabilitation, the resocializing, and a smooth reintroduction to society. So rather than having a facility that was there to punish, that is easier for them to then come back into regular society when they're done.
Time.
Thank you, Jeremy. Andrew?
Yeah, I would echo what Jeremy said, that the main goal should be to reduce the long-term goal, reduce the amount of correction officers we need. But right now, we need more officers. They're requiring officers, guards to work mandatory overtime. And that's a way to get people to quit and have just exacerbate the problem. So overall, we need strong unions. I think the union is doing a good job for the correction officers now on this issue, but we need the Scott administration to hire those new guards. And on the short term, it'll take more money, but overall, we need to support the union so that they can negotiate what is needed. You know, they know what's needed for their works, those that are in the prisons. They're telling us what they need, and if they negotiate it, kind of like Senator Cummings said, it's part of the Pay Act. So it's not like some other things where we have to find a new tax. It will be funded if they negotiate it, and then it'll be part of the whole general budget, which definitely needs revenue to meet the general budget, but we won't have to have a specific funding source for this one. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. And last, Ann Watson.
Yeah, the difficulty in going last is a lot of what folks have said already, I think is what I also want to get behind, you know, the importance of unions. I'm a union member myself, and I know the importance of unions. And I think that it's really important that we empower them and that we're listening to them and to what they are asking for. You know, the importance of pay increases. If they're not keeping up with inflation, then it's really a pay cut. And then I guess I would also add that this shortage of workers is not just affecting correctional officers. There are many fields across the state of Vermont right now that are experiencing significant shortages, including nurses, doctors, and teachers. And so this is, it's not an isolated phenomenon. And I guess I would add that it seems like if we can offer folks money to move here or to move their businesses here, that we ought to be able to also offer things like debt relief for folks to stay here.
Well, thank you all very much.
Hi, I'm Frank Sadowski from Christchurch Presbyterian, and the last two questions we have are related to racial justice. Many members of our congregations are highly motivated to take action to dismantle systemic racism in its various forms in our state and nation. One primary example of an institution where racial disparities need to be addressed is in public safety. What do you think the best approach is to create new organizational cultures in our municipal police departments? And what measures need to be taken to make all Vermonters and visitors feel safe? Jared, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Frank, for the question and for your work in this area. I think that the end of your question is key. People need to be and to feel safe. Along those lines, I want to thank VIA and lift up the work that you did developing the community engagement guide for working with local law enforcement that you released this spring. Because I believe that the primary purpose of our police departments is or should be to protect and serve, and to do so equitably and without racial bias. However, the data clearly show that there are significant racial disparities in our criminal justice system, from who gets pulled over to prosecution and sentencing. That's one of the reasons I support the work of justice reinvestment and also support fair and impartial policing policies, including to ensure that state and local police departments do not coordinate with ICE. I also support the ACLU's efforts to look at reforming qualified immunity. I think we need to ensure accountability for law enforcement systems and officers when power is abused.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Sure. So I guess I just want to be clear that this isn't really about individuals and bad apples and good apples. So while I appreciate, looking at organizational cultures and municipal police departments, we're still talking about structural systemic racism, and making sure that we don't have, the one racist officer on our forces. I don't know that it does that much in terms of structural racism. But if we're going to talk about places where we need to do some work, let's look at the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council. That's the place where our officers go to get a lot of their training, and they need some help. So the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council could use our help and use our support in fighting against policies that will end up with racist outcomes. I would also support ending qualified immunity, as was mentioned before. Folks ought to have consequences for their actions. And then I think we also need to strongly reconsider the responsibilities that we put onto our police officers. So this was framed maybe ineloquently as defund the police, but I think just thinking about what we are asking them to do could go a long way in this.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to continue the education work that a lot of churches have been doing on the structural racism that we have and have built into the society. That's important because there's still a lot of Vermonters that don't know about it and don't really understand how pervasive it is and how the impact it's having on our fellow Vermonters' lives. And that includes education into the police force and requiring that training and efforts to change the culture. I've talked to police chiefs around the county, and they're interested in this. They do want to change the culture, and we just have to hold them to that promise. And I think one of the things we got to make sure we do a better job of is requiring the collection of data and disaggregated racial data in particular. We've required it in the past. Some law enforcement hasn't really recorded it, hasn't kept it as we were supposed to. So there needs to be consequences for those law enforcement agencies that aren't collecting the data needed. Thanks.
Thank you. Ann Watson.
Yeah, thank you. So I would start with a document that has been really influential for the Montpelier Police Department, which is Obama's report on 21st century policing. It is a cultural document, I would say. And so it's has ideas like that police officers should be guardians and not warriors, prioritizes building trust and legitimacy, police policy and oversight, and emphasizes officer training and education, as well as some other topics as well. And so I would recommend that police departments embrace that and the principles of that it's built around. Now, to be fair, that's a hard thing to ask, to say like, hey, how about you embrace this document? So I want to go to some specific suggestions and criteria. We actually in Montpelier formed a police review committee to address this very question. How could we do better? Oh my gosh, my time is up. So I will just say, embed more social workers, empower body-worn cameras, and prevent militarization. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Cummings.
Okay. I think we need to continue doing what we have started doing, which is increasing the training at the Criminal Justice Council. I think we need, you said municipal. Our police departments are municipal. They're ours. They're under the supervision of our select boards, our town councils. We need to make sure, as our attitudes change, that we communicate those to our police departments. I've always been proud to deal with the Montpelier Police Department. I think officers need to be held accountable when they, do something severe. However, I'm not sure doing away with qualified immunity completely is it. If all the candidates don't know, senators have immunity. We can't be sued for something we do as part of our job and risk losing our home and family income. And I wouldn't be here if I were risking my family's security to be there. So I think we have to find another solution. I think we also have to give them the counseling and support
I'm
that
sorry, it's time. It's time.
Thank you. Thank you. Last question. It's been well documented that another area in which systemic racism exists is economic opportunities, particularly the large racial wealth gap that exists because of past and present inequities in housing and land ownership. What steps should the state take to create more opportunities for BIPOC-owned businesses and to create more housing opportunities for BIPOC Vermonters? And we'll start with Jeremy on this one.
Thanks. So I guess for this question, I would prefer listening to BIPOC Vermonters rather than just doing more data collection about this. I mean, there has to be a point where we simply believe the lived experience of BIPOC Vermonters. So when we're doing research, let's do qualitative research that collects that rather than quantitative research. I know that sort of blends the previous question with this one, but I really think that the best answer to this question are going to come out of groups like the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. I would defer to their expertise and feedback and their life lived experience. I also would support free college for all Vermonters. Let's look at BIPOC-owned farm and land grants. Let's have the discussion about reparations. Nobody said that yet. We can have that conversation. I would also like to see racial impact statements for every bill, like we have fiscal notes for every bill. So look at how each bill that we're looking at putting into law is going to disproportionately affect marginalized people if it does.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think a good example is what we did with the cannabis legislation, where we did have licensure and grower licenses supporting BIPOC Vermonters. And we did that not because the legislature figured out, but echoing the point that Jeremy just said, is because we did listen to those Vermonters and saying, you know, what did the systematic racism of our drug wars, what kind of impact that it had, and then how can we try to restore some of that through this new cannabis legalization, you know, experiment that we're going to go on. As we roll that out, how can we make sure that we're supporting those that were most harmed by the drug laws as we roll this out? So it's similar to what Jeremy said, as we pass new laws, we need to look at how can we lift up those that were most negatively impacted with the systematic racism that we've experienced for so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Ann Watson?
Yeah, thank you. So I would come back to an issue that I mentioned earlier, which is that zoning has its roots in racism. It was originally designed to keep Black families out of white owned neighborhoods, and I think it has been unfortunately very successful. And so I think one of the things that we need to look at is are there places in Vermont where single family homes are the only available option for the type of home that's that can be built in a particular area, and make sure that we are empowering duplexes, condos, and multifamily housing, and that we should be reconsidering density limits in downtowns and instead be looking at form-based code as the limiting factor there. And then I would also add, you know, when VHCB funds go out to different organizations, I think it would be useful to have a list of regional minority groups, including chapters of NAACP, refugee resettlement programs, Indigenous groups, that those housing opportunities can be advertised to. I'll be done. Thanks.
Thank you. Ann Cummings.
Okay. Again, I think I'd like to listen to the folks that are there and find out exactly what the problems are, and then craft a solution. I also think our BIPOC population is really small. I just found out I have Indigenous and American DNA. I might be Abenaki, I don't know. But we've done a good job of forcing the Abenaki people, who are really our largest population, underground. over decades. We need to do something about that. But we have also discriminated against poor white people in this state. We have a huge underbelly of people who have been poor, who have been white, who have been, suffered from all the housing discrimination that BIPOC people are also facing. And I think we need to be inclusive when we look at the problems we're trying to solve and make sure that everybody get, all boats go up.
It's time, sorry.
Thank you, Ann. Jared?
Yeah, I think that we need to listen to and learn from our BIPOC neighbors. As those who are familiar with my professional work know, whether that's directing the Energy Action Network or serving on the board of the Public Assets Institute, I believe in evidence-based policymaking, but evidence-based policymaking that's also rooted in empathy and justice. So I always want to be sure that we have as much information as possible about the problems we're trying to solve to inform more effective and systemic action. But that has to be on both a quantitative and a qualitative level, meeting folks where they're at. That's one of the reasons that I support funding, as called for by the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, of a statewide database to track racial disparities and to inform transformative data-driven solutions. It's also why I supported the Environmental Justice Bill, including as a member of the Vermont Climate Council and a co-author of Vermont's Climate Action Plan. And I also support staffing of Vermont's Racial Equity Office. But data and program staffing also needs to be backed up by funding and on-the-ground impact for Vermonters of color, including support for BIPOC-owned businesses and other historically marginalized groups.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you all.
So thank you all for your preparation and for your flexibility with the needing to go to 60-second answers. I know that's tough. We would like to offer each of you a chance to make closing remarks. And again, because of respect for time, we're going to ask folks, instead of doing a minute of closing remarks, we're going to give everybody about 30 seconds to do a quick wrap up for the evening. So we appreciate that. So we'll start with you, Andrew.
Great. Well, I'll just say that I'm really thankful again that you had this opportunity. It was great to think about the questions, even I didn't have as much time to think about them. I enjoyed that they were different than the other forums that we've had. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to meeting more voters in the district in the next few weeks before the August 9th primary and serving the district for another 2 years in the state Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Ann Watson?
Yeah, thank you. I also want to thank VIA for hosting this forum. I just want to point out that as mayor of Montpelier, these issues have been on my radar for a long time. We formed the Social and Economic Justice Committee. We formed a police review committee. We formed the Homelessness Task Force, all to address the kinds of problems that we've been discussing this evening. Each of these groups has come up with suggestions, which the council has moved forward, that I've supported. And I could say, I've not shied away from tackling these big issues as mayor, and I will not shy away from them as senator. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ann. Ann Cummings?
Okay, thank you. And thank you for hosting this forum. We've all have great ideas. We all are very similar. I think we have different kind of views, but we all are similar in where we want to go. What's going to happen though is whoever is elected is going down to the State House, and we're going to have to get together, and we're going to have to get together with people who don't think like we do. And we are going to have to work out a solution, and we're going to have to pay for it. And that's what my experience has been. That's what I love to do. I think that's basic to democracy. And so I hope you will give me a chance to go back and do it some more.
Thank you, Ann. Jared?
So thank you, VIA, and everybody who joined tonight. I want to begin where I started. I believe that we need more policymakers who come from working class backgrounds, who have experienced housing insecurity, who understand the stakes of getting public policy decisions right or wrong from their own life experiences. Senators who will be true and trusted partners with ethically grounded groups working for basic human dignity like VIA. I will always remember where I come from and the experiences of my family growing up. And I know that many Vermonters and Vermont families are having those same experiences or worse today and need policymakers in solidarity with them. I'll be a leader on the issues we discussed tonight, and if elected, know that I'll be working right there in partnership with you. I'd be honored to earn your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Jeremy?
Sure. I first want to lift up Correctional Officer Shawanda Hill's resignation letter at the VSEA website. Go check it out. The changes that we need to make need to be structural, not incremental. For housing, Vermonters shouldn't have to panic and go broke trying to stay in their communities. Universal health care. We have to have universal health care, which includes abortion care. Nobody's talked about abortion today. Medical care, dental care, vision care, hearing care, mental health care. That's all universal health care. Climate change. This is the issue of our lifetime. Let's talk about a carbon tax. The climate is not going to wait for us. I really appreciate all of you setting up this forum and Black Lives Matter.
Thank you all so much. Hopefully this was a valuable forum for both our candidates and our attendees. If this has sparked more questions for anyone and you would like to reach out to the candidates, we will be gathering contact information from them, and we will make sure that we share that with you and put it in the video description of the recording of this event, which we will post on the VIA YouTube channel. You will find a link directly to the video on the website, which is www.viavermont.org. Sorry, viavt.org, I should say. Voting in this primary election will happen on or by Tuesday, August 9th. You can vote by requesting a ballot by mail, by visiting your town clerk's office, or you can show up to the polls on Tuesday, August 9th. All the information you need to find out whether you're registered, where your polling place is, and to request a mail-in ballot can be found on the Vermont Secretary of State's website. There you can set up your very own My Voter page at mvp.vermont.gov. Candidates, thank you so much for your time and your flexibility this evening. Thanks to all of you for attending this forum sponsored by Vermont Interfaith Action. Have a really good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.